start to talk a little bit about what we're going to do tonight and what we did last week. So first of all, thank you everybody who is attending so far tonight. We appreciate you coming out, or staying home, I guess. Coming out really isn't the right word. But we appreciate you joining us. How's that? So like I said, this is College 101, and Rob Geddes here is from Bristol Community College. He is the Associate Dean of Admissions, and this is part 2. Did I get that right?
Associate Director. I'll take the Dean salary. But
all right, yeah, take the Dean salary. Tell him you earned it. And this is part 2 of College 101. So last week we sort of did the introduction, or Rob did the introduction to college, things to consider. That should be up on the website. So if you go to Norton High School's website, we have it up there for you to take a look at. And this is going to be part 2. And then next Wednesday, we'll have part 3. So we decided this year to sort of break it up into chunks because one, it lets people sort of absorb the information and not take all this information like a fire hose being squirted at you, but a little bit at a time. And then just being on Zoom is a little bit, I think, tiring for a lot of people, especially this time of night. So this way we broke it up. People could think about it. If you had questions, you could reach out to the guidance counselors or myself, and we can help you with that. So with that being said, this will also be recorded and will be put up on the website as well. And I'll let Rob take it from here. So thanks again, Rob, for coming out for us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And you joked about not necessarily coming out because everybody's staying home. The benefit to that is, of course, that you get to wear slippers.
Like that's right.
So last week we did kind of an introduction, what college really is, why you should be considering colleges, and how to really start that college process between college fairs, admissions counselors, and what different things you should be considering when you're looking at schools and deciding where to apply. So as was mentioned, we're picking up from there. What does the application process look like? And why is this not letting me? Can you see it? Perfect. Okay. So part 2 tonight, we're going to be talking about the actual application itself, how to decide where to enroll, and then what your next steps are after you enroll. So a common the common theme for tonight is going to be paying attention to the details, knowing what each institution needs as part of their application, because every institution is different, knowing what each institution's deadlines are, because every institution is different, is really the critical piece. So every institution will have some form of an application. And almost all of them will have some application fees. Bristol does have a free online application, but we have a processing fee for our paper application. And a lot of institutions have kind of shifted to that model. But be prepared and know that those application fees add up. Last week, I mentioned my daughter recently went through this process. I remember talking to one of her friends junior year. Her friend was a senior. And I said, so what schools did you apply to? And she rattled off like 10 or 11 schools. I'm thinking to myself, at $25 to $50 a pop, some schools are even more expensive than that. That is literally hundreds of dollars just on the application fees. So that's something to keep an eye on. As part of the application, you're going to submit 2 transcripts. When you submit your application, you are going to submit a transcript at that time that shows your dates, that shows your grades up to that date. Then after you have graduated, you do have to submit a final transcript. The final transcript is important because it does reflect your graduation date, which shows that you are in fact eligible to be enrolled at in a program at an institution, but it also guarantees that you're eligible for financial aid, which we'll be talking about next week. So you're going to want to make sure that you are in communication with the guidance office to make sure that those transcripts are sent to any school that that you want to receive them.
And if you don't mind me interrupting, just to explain our process a little bit, we
Yep.
use Naviance, which is a computer program platform that will allow you to do some of the search that we talked about last week. And for our parents that are, ninth and 10th graders, don't worry about this too much. The fall of your junior year, we're going to walk you through that process. We're going to start making sure the kids have accounts and all of that. So that will all be taken care of. But we do use that for probably about 95% of our students will use Naviance and the Common App for the larger institutions. And we also do send a transcript midway through their senior year as well. So we do the one at the beginning of their senior year, in the middle of the senior year, and then a final. So.
Thank you very much for that. And I apologize. The wind must be blowing outside because my dog is barking like crazy. So I apologize for the background noise if you hear him. The other critical piece about the final transcript, I think everyone has heard of senioritis. A lot of schools will review that final transcript to ensure that you do still meet all of their eligibility requirements. So for some of the more selective schools or some of the more selective programs at different institutions, if that final transcript isn't up to snuff to what they expect or what they require, they can rescind their admission. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then the other information listed here, I'm going to talk in more detail about, so I'm not going to go too far into those right now. For a lot of institutions, there are 3 timelines for admission. I shouldn't say every. I'll start with rolling admission. Rolling admission is really no application deadline. Bristol falls into this category. Whenever you submit your application, we'll review it. We'll let you know if you're admitted. Many institutions will have a typical application deadline that's usually March 1st, sometime between March 1st and April 1st, because they do want to have a good idea of what their enrollment in different programs are, and figure out before the May 1st deposit deadline, figure out how many spots they have. So there will be some standard deadlines. Aside from that, there is also early action and early decision. Early action is typically, and they both kind of operate on the same timeline. So with both of these, the application deadline is typically sometime either November or very early in December, with the idea that you're submitting your application earlier and you're getting your admission decisions earlier. The difference is the level of commitment. With early action, you apply very early in your senior year, again, sometime in October by usually November 1st, November 15th, or December 1st. You find out, usually, depending on when you apply, you might find out as early as the holidays or sometime early in January or February. And then from there, you still have to submit whichever school you choose, you would submit your deposit to that institution by the May 1st deadline. Early decision is much more of a commitment. This is an application process only for students that are applying to a school saying, if you give me a financial aid package that works for me, then I am going to attend your institution. Early decision is literally a binding contract. So you're applying as early as November, you're getting your decision by December or January, and you're telling that institution by applying early decision that if they give you a financial aid package that will help you finance your education, then you will attend that institution. So this process should only be done for your first top choice institution if they make it available to you. Again, it's a binding contract, and I can't emphasize that enough. I did hear a few years ago of a student that did early decision to 2 institutions, and all of the colleges and universities we are networked in a number of different ways. But one of them is called the National Clearinghouse. And so when one institution ran the student's name through the clearinghouse, that student popped up as being listed as early decision at another institution. And that institution got that red flag as well. Both institutions rescinded their admission for that student because early decision should only be the top choice. So that's considered a breach of contract, and the consequences for that is the rescinding of admission. So again, early decision is great for students that know exactly where they want to go, but there's a lot of commitment involved with it. So given the choice, I would always encourage students to do early action over early decision.
And we've been told that choosing to put early decision doesn't really make that much of an impact, if any, on whether you're going to get accepted or not. And I know we had a young lady a few years ago who did early decision. She got a decent financial aid package, but unfortunately for her, she made the decision, she committed, she did it. But I know for a fact that her second institution came in with a much larger package, but that was it. She had already committed. So yeah, that was a painful one. So you really need to know, if you're going to go early decision, that this is absolutely where I'm going. It doesn't matter too much about finances. I'm going there. This has always been my dream, or for whatever reason. The only other thing I wanted to say, Rob, if you don't mind, is rolling admissions. Some places do rolling admissions, but then they get to a cap. So, we had this situation with a student. We 2 years ago, we kind of tried to warn them that this institution, yes, they did rolling admissions, but at some point they run out of space, or they run out of, they beat their quota of acceptances, and then they stop. And this person did not apply in time. So if you are going to do rolling admissions, do not wait to the last minute. For many institutions to do that. So.
I did see a question in the chat about community service hours and AP. I'm going to talk about AP in a little bit, so if you don't mind, we'll hold off on answering that.
Yeah, and I can answer the community service hours. This year, just there's been some confusion because our last senior class, we had to waive that as a requirement, and we've decided to waive it this year for obvious reasons. So there's a graduation requirement for community service hours in typical years, which is 50 hours over the course of a student's 4 years with us. And then as far as community service, I think it's just one of the things, and I think we're going to talk about this later on, I assume, that goes on a resume. So we'll get into those two things in a few minutes.
Yeah. So as far as exams go, again, every school is different, whether it is the deadline to have your exam scores sent or what their score minimums are. Everybody knows about the SAT and the ACT. Some schools for students that are ELL or ESL students, some schools may require the TOEFL exam, which is the test of English as a foreign language. And then AP is not required at all institutions. And then there are college placement tests, which happen as part of the enrollment process rather than part of the application process. So I'm going to jump back up to SAT and ACT. A few things you'll hear schools talk about now that has, I would say over the last 5 or 10 years, it started over the last 5 or 10 years, but it's really grown and become more popular, especially with COVID last year. More schools are going to 2 different options when it comes to SAT and ACT. First is be what they call a super score. So a student takes the SAT in the spring of their junior year, and their total score is 1150. They got a 600 on the math and a 550 on the English. And then in their senior year, they took the SAT again, and they only got a 400 on the math, and they got a 570 on the English. A super score is going to look at the best math score and the best English score and combine those for one score. So that 600 math in the junior year and that 570 English in the senior year, instead of getting an 1150 or whatever the other grade, or the 970, that student's going to be scored as an 1170. So that's a super score where they're giving you the best scores from each section to really improve your eligibility. A lot of other schools are going to a test optional model. And that is where you're notifying the school that you did not take the SAT or ACT, or you don't want to submit those scores. But know that if you are taking the test optional route, it's going to vary based on the institution, but the institution may ask you to provide some additional information, whether that is a documented reason as to why you didn't take the test, or they may say, that's fine, you're not going to do either of the exams, but instead of doing one essay topic, we're going to have you do 2 or 3 essay topics. So some schools will kind of add other parts to the application for students that aren't participating in the test options. Advanced placement, like I said, is not required, but there are a few benefits to it. Some schools may provide scholarship opportunities for advanced placement students. Some schools will award college credit for advanced placement. For example, at Bristol, students that complete AP Lang or AP Comp may get credit for our Composition 1 or Composition 2 classes. You do have to reach a certain score minimum on the test in order to receive that credit. At Bristol, it's a 3 or higher. I believe at all of the UMass campuses, it's a 4 or higher. Some more selective institutions require that it be a perfect score, that it be a 5 in order for you to get that credit. So if you are enrolled in AP, that's something to keep an eye on. I will put a quick plug in here for our dual enrollment program, because while AP does give you the chance at college credit, the dual enrollment program is an opportunity to enroll in classes at Bristol that you can then transfer to any other institution. So there's more of a guarantee of college credit being awarded. And then the college placement tests, the last thing I'll say about these, their goal, the objective with college placement tests is really to see where you should be in terms of reading, writing, or math for your first semester of classes. But sometimes those can be waived based on either your high school GPA or your SAT or ACT scores. If you meet certain minimums, then we might be able to waive those placement tests for you and just go ahead and register you for classes as is.
Do you mind if I just jump in on a couple of things there, just from our end, Rob? Some people have asked SAT versus ACT, and my advice is, most people do the SAT, but if you're not happy with those scores, or that doesn't feel like it's a good test for you, I often recommend at least taking the ACT once, see how it goes. Rob's heard my story before, but my son happened to do that in some institutions. Depending on how with a certain GPA, they then look at what your test scores are, and that helps determine what level of merit you would get. And he did much better on the ACT than he did on the SAT, and over the course of the 4 years, it's going to save us about 20 grand. So it was well worth the $100 to take that risk. Some people just seem to do better. The way their mind works, the way the questions are done, seems to be the case. And then for AP, the other piece is that each institution, they tend to change. We've discovered what they'll take for a score, or it could even depend on the department. So, you might be able to get away with a 3 and get credit for psychology, but you need a 5 for biology. And the only way to sort of know that, to be honest, is once you get to the point where you're applying or trying to make decisions, you really want to take a look at that institution's website year to year, and make sure that you know exactly what they're going to accept. If it's not on their website, call the admissions office and ask, because it does change. And then a lot of people, you know, feel that the more AP classes you have, the better off you are. That's not necessarily the case. And I don't know, Rob, are you going to hit on that later on, or can I address
Yeah.
that now? You are.
Yep.
Okay. I'll let you have that conversation then. Sorry.
No worries. So the essay, a lot of folks, a lot of students and family members that I meet with, or that I talk to about the admissions process, really worry about the essay. So I'm going to borrow from a colleague at Boston College that said, use your head, your hand, and your heart. And those kind of cover what you're looking at here. But your head, really think about what you want to say to the person reading the essay. How are you trying to demonstrate yourself to them? Because that's really the purpose of the essay, is to learn more about the person beyond the grades and beyond the co-curriculars and things like that. So what are you going to write about? Your hand, make sure that you're the one writing it. And when I say you're the student, make sure the student is the one writing it, because you're really trying to represent who you are. And you should, that being said, you should absolutely seek feedback. Share it with a guidance counselor. Share it with an English professor to make sure that your grammar is correct. Share it with a coach if you're writing about athletics. Share it with someone that is going to give you some positive feedback about it. But make sure you're the one writing it, and that it's your voice. And then finally, the heart piece, make sure it's something you're passionate about, because again, this is what's going to separate you. For a lot of institutions, I've heard other admissions representatives just come out and say, if you hit this GPA mark, I'm not going to look at the rest of your application. I'm going to admit you. But after that GPA, or if you're below that GPA, now I'm going to look at your test scores, or now I'm going to look at your essay. And that's really where you're going to start to separate yourself from other candidates for the institution. So the essay really should be representing you and what you're passionate about. And absolutely get creative with it. The admissions counselors often joke about, politely, I should emphasize, it's polite joking. It's kidding because we love, but there are only so many essays that they can read about the student that scored the game-winning goal in the soccer, in the league championship for their soccer team, or about their final performance of their junior year through the theater department. So start to think about other ways to do it. A high school that I was speaking at once, the guidance counselor talked about how one of their students had talked about the game-winning basketball shot, but it was from the perspective of the student's sneakers. So it was talking about the camaraderie among the team leading up to the game. It talked about the excitement for the game during the day, and how the student reacted from the sneakers perspective, which it's the same story, but it's a very unique spin on it. And so that doesn't just talk about great athletic prowess, but it also talks about a level of creativity that may not come out in other essays. So feel free to get creative and have fun with it. 2 big words of caution though: avoid controversial topics, which you can see in that second section of bullets. You don't want to do a topic that's overdone. You want to be original, but you also don't want to be too controversial. It's often said, if you want to keep friends, then don't talk about religion and don't talk about politics. And I think in the last year, we can all agree politics isn't necessarily something you want to talk about with folks you don't know. because you don't know who is going to be reading that essay and how they're going to react to your stance on a controversial topic. I'm not saying completely avoid them, but if you are treading into those dangerous waters, take a lot of caution with how you're framing what you're going to be writing. The other big warning I always like to give, if you're submitting the same essay to multiple institutions, then make sure that you're editing anytime you reference the institution. Bridgewater State University doesn't want to read a fantastic essay and then in the last sentence see, "This is why I can't wait to enroll at Framingham State." So that's something, or, the Bridgewater State Bears don't want to read about how you want to join the Framily, the Framingham State Rams. So those little tiny details, which goes along with that third set, make sure you're revising, make sure you're editing, and make sure you're getting all of that feedback. So there's a lot of concern around the essay, but as long as you're doing it your way and representing who you are, then it will take care of itself.
Again, in Norton, we usually, the juniors at the end of their junior year work on the essay in their English classes. So we kind of changed that. It used to be done senior year in the fall, but so many students now are, trying to get everything done over the summer or get most of their applications up and out the door before October, that it just wasn't as helpful. So we will be doing those in probably middle of May, end of beginning of May. They'll start that process. That way you have English teachers taking a look at them. It doesn't have to be the final version. I've had lots of students who continue to kind of fine tune it over the summer, come back in the early fall, have somebody look at it again, guidance counselors, English teachers, or whoever else, and then use that as their application. So, and for the other thing I would say is that most of the students are going to do the Common App, which has a set of prompts. It has one big essay. However, there are a number of colleges that ask for supplemental essays, or they'll call them optional essays. That word optional is not really optional. If a institution has an optional essay, do the optional essay, because again, it's not really an option. They're going to try to, I always think it's a little bit of a test to see how much do you really want to go here and how much work you want to do. So just be aware of that. I've had a number of students that we've had to address that with, and we don't always catch it because we don't always see everybody's exact application.
So kind of pulling some of the other considerations for your application together, because your grades, your test score, your essay are all components to the application, but there's some other stuff that goes into it that again really speaks to who you are as a student, and really and what you're going to bring to their campus. So before I talk about this slide, I'll kind of make a pitch, or make another kind of big tip. When colleges and universities are looking at a set of applications, they're trying to determine who is going to make the best contributions to their institution, but they're also trying to decide who's going to represent that institution off campus the way they want to be represented. Who do they want to wear their sweatshirt with pride? And that's where all of this stuff comes in. So the letters of recommendation are a critical component to a lot of institutions' application process. Who should write them for you? Someone that you have a strong relationship with. That doesn't mean a family member. Please, no family member letters of recommendation. But coaches, teachers, guidance staff. Some schools will have parameters. We need 3 letters of recommendation, at least 1 from a teacher and at least 1 from a guidance counselor. And then the third one is for you to choose. Or, we want 3 letters of recommendation, at least 2 have to be from your high school staff. So that could be an educator, a guidance counselor, a coach. and then you can choose the others to also be from the high school or somewhere else. And from somewhere else, that could be a troop leader for Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. That could be, if you've been heavily involved in your church, someone from your church that you've worked closely with. So those strong relationships, a supervisor, if you work part-time at Dunkin' Donuts or McDonald's, you know, your shift manager that you always work with that is always impressed by your work ethic. So those people that you have strong relationships with, and people that are going to speak well of you. When I was actually in college and applying to grad schools, I asked one of my professors to write a letter of recommendation for me, and he said, well, why don't I tell you what I'm going to say, and then you can decide if you want me to write it, which sounds awful at first, like, oh, my goodness, what are you going to say about me? But it was really just something he did with all students to say, look, you're probably going to ask more than one person, and you probably need more than one letter. So here's what I would say, and you can decide whether I should go ahead and write it for you. So make sure that because you don't want a letter of recommendation that says, you know, this student does nothing. You don't want them to do the joke of, you'd be lucky to get the student to take your classes, meaning like, you know, you're lucky if you get them to do anything. So make sure that they're someone that can strongly recommend you. Be sure to give adequate notice. The high school, by having your college essay be part of the English curriculum in junior year, Norton is obviously dedicated to getting you prepared early for the application process. So follow suit with that. Start asking for letters of recommendation early on. My daughter asked for a letter of recommendation from her music teacher in July. He said, not only am I going to write one, but it's going to be the best one I've ever written because no one has ever asked me this early. So now he's got July until November to write this letter of recommendation. He can take his time with it. He can really think about it. He can revise it and reread it to make sure it's the right recommendation that he wants. The person that gets asked on October 28th, because the application is due November 1st, and there are 20 or 30 other students also asking that same person around the same time, how much time is that person really going to have to write your letter of recommendation and put as much thought into your specific letter? So the more notice they have, the better they can do. And share your resume with those people. You know, you may have a great relationship with your cross-country coach, and that you may have run for them for all 4 years, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are also babysitting and working part-time and heavily involved in community service. So that can really help them contribute more to that letter of recommendation as well. And always be sure to thank them because they're taking time out to help you succeed and help you achieve your dreams. The least you can do is give them a quick handwritten notes are always nice to say thank you for the time. As far as academics go, we want you to challenge yourself. We want you to be goal-oriented. And I talked about dual enrollment earlier, but we also don't want you to overwhelm yourselves. A lot of students worry about, you know, I'm in honors classes and I'm getting all A's, but should I be in AP classes and getting B's? Those are things institutions look at differently. You know, they may see a student that's all loaded up with AP classes and getting decent grades, B, B plus, A minus, and say the person's not top of their class in their AP classes, but they're still doing well and they're really challenging themselves. Whereas a student that is enrolled in all AP classes, but really struggling in those classes, that student seems to have overwhelmed themselves. And so that can be a concern for some folks, you know, so that it's again, a question to ask of the school that you're applying to, but definitely challenge yourself without overwhelming yourself entirely. And as far as the extracurricular and co-curricular activities, don't just think about school-related activities. Athletics, theater performances, community service, student government are all critical to, again, explaining who you are and what you're passionate about. but don't limit yourself to those. If you are working part-time, if you are involved in service organizations outside of school, if you're involved in an organization through your church or anything like that, those are things to absolutely list out. If you and a few friends are in a band that does performances outside of school every once in a while, list that on there. If you are responsible for babysitting, or not babysitting, but watching younger siblings and making sure they get their homework done before your parent or guardian gets home, list that on there. That's stuff that shows level of responsibility and levels of commitment that institutions are interested in seeing. Absolutely include any awards or recognitions that you got. Employee of the Month at Dunkin' Donuts for April 2020, absolutely. Not that anyone who was at Dunkin' Donuts in April of 2020, but you know what I mean. So absolutely share all of that so again, colleges are getting a more well-rounded view of who you are, with, again, out overwhelming yourself. And that's why right across the bottom there, we have quality rather than quantity. Are we impressed by someone that's involved in 10 co-curricular activities between sports and service and student government and you know, the dance club and everything else? That's great. But if you're spreading yourself a mile wide and an inch thin, what does your calendar look like? What type of organization are you really dealing with, and how much are you succeeding at all of those? If you've got 4 or 5 things that you're doing exceptionally well in, and you've held elected offices within those organizations, and you were a team captain, those are typically going to reflect more favorably for a student than the student that's just a general member for a bunch of stuff. I do remember when I was in high school, which was a long time ago, those years started with the number 1 for how long ago that was. But I had a number of friends that junior and senior year finally started getting involved with student council with me. And they were like, oh, I got to do it now because I'm going to be applying to colleges next year. Like, colleges know that trick. You know, they've noticed, like, the student did nothing until the fall of their junior year. So for those of you that are younger students in the group, don't wait to get involved, and don't think we're only looking at 1 year. We're looking at everything. And so make sure that you're showing us everything you've got.
I was just going to say, and I know we need to move on because we're already past our time, but one of the things that we're trying to stress, and that what we're hearing from admissions reps is sort of balance in building, right? So you want to stay balanced. As Rob said, you don't want to bury yourself, whether it's academically or academics and clubs and activities. They're more and more worried about students sort of coming in and being burnt out before they even get to college. So it's definitely something that we're looking for. And they do like to see that building, right? So that each year we're seeing growth academically, we're seeing growth in co-curricular activities, that you started off as, you know, a member, and now you're secretary or president of that club. Those are the kinds of things. You don't need 100 things on your resume. You need a good solid resume. And the same with, whether it's AP or not, you have to really be honest about how much you're going to burn out, how much stress you're going to be under, and are you going to be able to perform over the long haul. So maybe it's an AP course and a dual enrollment course instead of 3 APs, and that's an individual conversation with family and maybe guidance counselors, but just something to be aware of. We have to have some balance.
Absolutely. So at this point, you've submitted all of the applications, you're starting to get your admissions decisions in, and now it comes down to, okay, how do I decide where I'm going to go? And if you remember from last week, one of the big things I tried to focus on and drive home with students is that big tip of come up with a list of your priorities. What do you want out of your college experience, and what schools are going to provide that? And so now that you've gone through the application process, now's the time to revisit that list. So the most common priorities, what is it actually going to cost me? What are the out-of-pocket costs? College Board does have a net price calculator on their website. And like I said, we're going to talk about financial aid and what out-of-pocket costs really mean next week. But aside from cost, job placement is another big priority. And then some of those other factors to consider. Is it the type of culture or environment that you want to be a part of? Do they have the right activities that you want? How convenient is it for you, and how convenient is life around campus for what you want to be doing? What are the career opportunities, whether it's internships or co-ops? How big is it? Where is it? Where is it located? What's the social life like on campus and off campus? If you think you might want to study abroad, is that even an option? What services do they have available? If you think you might need tutoring, which I think every student should take part in, even successful students could absolutely use some level of tutoring, some level of academic support, just to be that much more successful. Maybe boost up your scholarship for the following semester. Do they have support services for any disabilities you may have? What are those factors that you need to consider, and what school is going to meet those needs for you better than others? And that's how you'll eventually arrive at where you want to attend.
And some people may be thinking, well, why are we doing this with our 9th and 10th graders? They're still 2-3 years away from making those decisions, because I think the more you can expose them, the more you understand what this process is going to be like as a family member, as a student, you'll be able to sort of grow in your perceptions and your understandings of what it is you're going to want when you get to that point. Again, if you're rushing to do this all at the end of junior year, or even worse, the fall of your senior year, you're not going to be able to kind of absorb the information. You're not going to be able to say, well, I thought I really liked this kind of school. Maybe I liked that when I was in 10th grade, but this is how I've changed as a person. And these are the kinds of things I've become interested in. And now, maybe not so much. I think I'm leaning this way. But if you haven't even had that exposure, you haven't thought about this process, then I think it puts a lot more pressure on everybody, having these discussions about what can we truly afford? If you want to go here, you better have a GPA of 3.2, because that's where the merit starts. Like those kinds of discussions, because, you can't go back and make up 10th grade grades, at the end of your junior year. So that's why we're doing some of this.
So it does look like a new section, but I promise there's only one slide in this section for those of you that are worried about how long we're going. So now you've decided where you're going. And again, next week we'll talk about financial aid and how you're going to pay for it. But now that you're enrolled, how are you going to be successful? Getting there is a small part of the battle. You have to then stay there in one way or another. And while transferring is an option based on your needs, and a growing number of students are transferring for a variety of different reasons, whatever school you go to, even if you do transfer, you still need to be successful when you get there. And so how do you do that? Initiate, participate, advocate. I can't emphasize enough. One of the first small bullets we had in one of the very first slides last week talked about becoming more independent as a benefit to college. And not only is it a benefit, but it's a forced truth. You're the one that's going to be responsible for initiating, participating, and advocating for yourself, to the point where when it comes to billing issues, when it comes to grades, when it comes to financial aid, you are going to be the college's first contact, not a family member. In fact, legally, we can't even talk to family members about it unless you tell us to. So when we say initiate, take the first step. Don't wait for your advisor to reach out to you, although we're going to do our best. Our advising team is going to do their best to make that connection with you. You don't have to wait for it. Go ahead and take that first step, and get your own process started. Participate, be active. I can't tell you, to give you an idea of how strong this theory is, I have never seen anyone successfully research any statistical data that says students that are not active in their campus community are more successful. It is a known truth in higher education that the more active a student is on their campus and in their community, the more successful they are. And when I say active, does that mean you have to be a captain of an athletic team or president of the student body? Absolutely not. That could just be participating in study groups. That could be attending campus events. First weekend my daughter was at her institution, she participated in Disney trivia, came in 3rd place behind 2 seniors that were really upset they almost lost to a freshman. And so she started to make connections and started to build her own piece of the campus. And that ownership really drives students to be more focused on their academics. So the more active you are in clubs and organizations, in events on campus, in study groups, and in class, the more successful you will be. And when I say participate in class, don't just go to class. Make sure that you're listening to the instructor, make sure you're participating in the discussion, make sure you're meeting all of the assignment deadlines. I talked to a mom once who, we were at a college fair, and she said that her older child went to a particular institution that was very expensive. And she said to motivate him to get to class, I told him how much I was paying in tuition and fees and housing for the semester, and broke that out by how much it cost per class meeting, and told him that every class he missed, he was going to have to write me a check for $566. I'm not saying family members should get that drastic with motivating the participation in class, but just to give you an idea of how much you're spending on your education and how you don't want to waste that opportunity. So make sure that you're active and participating, and advocate for yourself. As much as our staff will do their best to support you and help you with anything you need, until we know that you need that help, or until we know that you need that support, we may not recognize it. Okay. So you need to advocate for yourself when necessary. And that's not a big deal. We're not saying, you need to go directly to the president's office because you're not getting somewhere. That just means talking to your advisor, talking to, if you're living on campus, your resident assistant or your resident director, saying, look, I need help with this issue. And then having them connect you with anyone else that can help. But be sure to advocate for yourself so that you're really continuing to drive, you're continuing that drive of meeting all of your own needs and being successful academically. So that is, I'm going to click the stop share. That concludes this portion. Like I said, we are going to talk about financial aid next week, and going into more details about the different types of aid and how that works.
Thank you, Rob. I would just say the only thing on that last slide is this is a great time as 9th and 10th graders to start to practice some of those skills, right? So this is all stuff that you can do here at Norton High School. Taking more responsibility for your academics, participating, joining things, although I know it's hard at this particular year, but, advocating for yourself with your teachers and your staff, taking on maybe some more responsibilities at home, getting some practice in cooking and cleaning and doing your laundry. As crazy as that sounds, it's one of the key factors to students having a successful college experience with those skills, learning how to open a checking account, those kinds of things. So absolutely time to practice those now. This is all preparing you as a transition to college. This is sort of step one, I guess I'd say. We do have one question. If anybody else has questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A. The question, are students on IEPs required to take SAT, ACTs? If they do they have more time to complete the test?
Yes and no.
I was just going to say the same thing. Yeah.
The schools that you're applying to, you should check with what their requirements are. Like I said, a lot of schools are moving to a test optional model, which means if you provide documentation related to the IEP or the disability or the accommodation, then that school will say that school will make a determination usually. As far as what I will say on the college end down the road, I talked about placement tests earlier. All colleges have some form of a at Bristol it's called Office of Disability Services. So they're the folks that will set up any accommodations. So when it comes time to take those placement tests, the Disability Services Office will set up either additional test time, as you mentioned here, or maybe a separate test environment, depending on what the student's needs and accommodations are. IEPs, I will say, a common misconception is, or misperception is, that the IEP carries with you into college. That's not the case. There's not there isn't a, you're not going to be sitting in team meetings or anything like that. But that doesn't mean those services and accommodations aren't available. So every school will be different about what you need to submit to them to receive those accommodations. And they'll be different in how those accommodations work. And so that's something that you'll need to identify with each institution as you're deciding where to enroll. But usually those services are available upon admission. So at Bristol, we're not going to wait until you get to class to have those test accommodations done. We're going to give those to you as part of the placement test.
Yeah, and as far as whether you get additional time, so what has to happen is, I am actually the person. So you need to let, in this case, Ms. Hoey, the team chair at the high school, know that you're interested in taking the SAT, and then she'll notify me, and we take a copy usually of either the 504 or the IEP, and there's a process through College Board. I have to apply for that. I have to verify that it's an active IEP. We list out the accommodations that are used, and not all accommodations, by the way, are choices for College Board, but let's say extended time is one of those choices. And then they actually the ones that make the decision. They oftentimes will ask for prior testing, a copy of the IEP, and so forth. So they're pretty good about it, as long as it's a valid IEP or 504. If it's something tricky, sometimes they'll ask for more documentation, but usually it's pretty easy. So that's something you want to do. If you're talking about, let's say, taking it in March, you want to get that information to me, or let Ms. Hoey know that you're interested about this time of the year, junior year, and we'll be able to get that process for you. The other thing I would say is, if you are somebody who has a 504 or an IEP, and you're going to be using student services, understand that it falls on the student to advocate for themselves, that you really want to go and have discussions with the disabilities office, go to those open houses, make sure you go and have conversations, because I'll just be perfectly blunt. Some institutions are phenomenal and really supportive and have lots of different ways, and then others not so much. It's just the way I'll put it. So, it really needs to be a very important part of the decision, but understand they're not chasing you down. They'll send an email sometimes to a professor, but you as the student really need to go and say, hey, did you get the email at the beginning of the year? Remember, I'm the student that needs blah, blah, blah. So it's a very different approach. So again, advocacy now and through high school, and having those discussions even about accommodations with your teachers in junior, senior year is a good practice, a good skill to develop, because it's gonna be beneficial down the road. So I think we did that one. Do colleges mostly look at grades in junior and senior year?
So as I'm reading this question, I'm thinking back, every question we get, and I apologize for this, but it's kind of it depends. That's just how it is. It depends on the institution, but it also depends on the student. They're not just looking at no institution is going to look just at 1 year. They're going to look at the entire transcript. They're going to look at all of the classes that are taken. They're going to look at all of the grades. What's going to be weighed more? That's where it gets a little fuzzy. So for a student that was excelling in grades 9 and 10 and at the start of grade 11, but then grades started to slip in the second part of junior year, that school's going to want to see that school's going to pay more attention to the senior year grades to see, was that just a a minor hiccup, or was that the start of a new trend? Conversely, students that are struggling in 9th and 10th grade, but then really kick it up in junior year, then colleges might want to see the senior year grades just to confirm junior year wasn't a fluke, and sometimes in those situations, sometimes that's where an essay can come in handy,
For an interview.
or an on-campus interview. Absolutely. For in grades 9 and 10, I really wasn't motivated, and I didn't have any real objective or goal with or known career path that I thought I was going to follow. But the summer before my junior year, I staffed a summer camp, and I realized that I was put on this earth to be a guidance counselor. And I knew that I had to do this, this, and this. And so I started that my junior year. That's something that's really going to resonate with an admissions counselor. So it's not a matter of focusing on one year's grades per se. It again is looking at everything and then figuring out the context around the academic performance.
But the hardcore reality is too that GPA is GPA, and we can't change that, right? So you could have 2 fantastic junior and senior years, and that could help. But if you need a certain GPA to get into an institution or to meet one of those merit, that's your freshman, sophomore grades are still going to count. So, and I think the other piece that people sometimes forget is a lot of the institutions, I don't have a nicer way to say it, it's kind of throw out some of the electives or all of the electives and PE and, those kinds of things. They really look at the core courses. Some institutions may look at certain electives if they're within the core, or if, let's say, it's music and you're applying to a school for the arts, like obviously they'll look at that, but they don't always look. So sometimes I have students go, well, I got all A's in my electives. Like, that's great. But when the institution actually gets them, the GPA you see on your transcript is not necessarily the GPA that they use to make the determination of whether you're going to be accepted there or not.
And to that point, some schools will have, because, and this kind of goes back to the high schools where, Norton may calculate a GPA one way based on a student's, AP classes may be weighed more heavily than honors classes, which may be weighed more heavily than college prep. A couple of the high schools that I've worked with are on a 5.0 scale as opposed to a 4.0 scale. And some colleges and universities will have spreadsheets and lists and grids that detail, okay, so for this GPA scale with this type of weight on classes, this is our threshold for students, and for all of those circumstances. More and more schools are going to their own GPA scale. So they'll look at, because you guys are on a 5.0?
Yep.
Yep. So Norton's on a 5.0, but this high school student is on a 4.0 scale. Norton doesn't do any weight for these classes, but this school does. And they're just going to look at it and put it on their own GPA scale and determine it that way. So again, what your GPA is on your transcript may not be what they see, because they're considering all the grades, but they're just calculating it in an entire different way.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. And Ms. Zielinski, who's doing our closed captioning, I'd like to thank you for hanging in with us beyond what we usually do. So, and thank you, everybody that is out there. Hopefully, we'll see you next week when we talk about financial aid, the real fun stuff. So,
Absolutely.
Rob, thank you so much, and have a good night.
Thank you. You too. See you soon.
Bye-bye.